Okay, friends, welcome to this lecture series on political obligation. Last day, we had a lecture on fundamental assumptions regarding the political theory of obligation. So we have come across Sophocles and Plato. Today, the lecture is an extension of what we have discussed the last day. But this is not about the fundamentals. We will talk about the theoretical positions adopted by various schools of thought on the question of political obligation. So as a part of this lecture, we will make a reference to political obligation, Christian theology, social contractualist, utilitarianism, idealism, Marxism, anarchism, and finally Gandhism. We will talk the positions, the theoretical positions being adopted by the aforesaid schools of thought about the question, why should we have political obligation? So friends, first of all, let us understand in this lecture what the medieval Christian theologians have to tell you about why should you obey laws of your land. Friends, political obligation for the medieval Christian theologians is connected with divine command theory. That is, Christian theologians believe the laws of your land are divinely ordained. The laws of your land are the commands of your Lord, that is God. Therefore, Christian theology assumes man is never permitted to break laws, no matter what. And this position has a close connection with the book of Genesis. What is it? Friends, Bible says men are sinners. Bible is skeptical of, or we say suspicious of, man's nature. That is, Adam and Eve disobeyed laws. They disobeyed the code of the God. And for the medieval Christian theologians, we can say the 5th century theologian St. Augustine, 14th century theologian St. Thomas Aquinas, for all these theologians, Jesus Christ had already drawn a distinction between what is political authority and what is God's authority. And when both of them come in conflict, of course, we know that Christians prefer not the laws of the rulers, but the laws of the God. Christians have their primary allegiances to the law of the God. For the Christians, great moral authority belongs to God. Ruler is, or the monarchy is, below the Lord. Look at, friends, you may look at what Jesus had said about Caesar. When Jesus was asked to pay tax, Jesus asked the soldiers, "Show me the coin for the tax." And the Bible says, and they brought him denarius. And they brought him denarius. And Jesus said to them this way, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" They said, I mean, Roman soldiers. They said, "Caesar's." Then he said, he means Lord Jesus Christ. Then he said to them means soldiers, Roman soldiers. Then he said to them, "Therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard it, they marveled. This is what, Bible says. Friends, for Christians, Jesus makes it clear that obedience is must, but your obedience to law should be based on faith. You should give what is due to Caesar and also give what is due to God. That said, what if your ruler's command comes at variance with the God's law? Simply put it, what if your ruler's law come in conflict with the law of the God? And there is an answer to this. It is given by St. Paul's epistles to the Romans 13:1. St. Paul's epistles to the Romans 13:1. I have referred this for you from the Bible. "For there is no authority except from God." Bible says like this. It's an epistle given to the Romans by St. Paul. "For there is no authority except from God, And those that exist, even if there exist some laws, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, he who resists, means who among you are going to refuse the law? Therefore, he who resists the authorities resist what God has appointed. And those who resist will incur judgment. See, this is a warning. Paul to the Romans. What is it? That is, there is no authority except the authority of the God in the world. And all the Christians should respect the authority of the God. And suppose if there exists some other authority other than God, that means that authority is instituted by God. Therefore, if you resist an authority which is an authority other than God's authority, it amounts to you breaking the command of the God, because the authority other than the authority of the God is instituted by God. So you are not supposed to disobey the command of the sovereign, because sovereign that you have is instituted by God. So it's very clear. The epistles to the Romans by St. Paul is very clear that you should respect authority of your ruler. You should obey the law because the authority of the ruler is command of the Lord. That is, even man-made laws are conformed to God's laws. The law you have is the laws of the God. That is why Jesus said, what should be given to Caesar? What should give to Caesar? What is Caesar's? And to God, what is God's? So even according to Martin Luther, the Protestants, Christians may not resist their rulers. The Protestants have come out of Roman Catholics church or Roman papacy. But Martin Luther himself says Christians may not resist their rulers, but they may disobey when the ruler's commands are contrary to the command of the God. It's very clear that Christians are not supposed to disobey the law, because the law of the ruler is the command of the God. This is what divine command theory of obligation tell about political obligation. And friends, now there is another theoretical position, a dominant paradigm, 18th and 17th, including 17th, 18th centuries. As we already know, the social contract theorist. So Thomas Hobbes and John Locke used the theory of social contract, and they challenged the divine command or divine right theory of monarchs, that monarch gained the right to rule not from people but from God. That is divine right theory, and this was defended by Sir Robert Filmer. And John Locke has criticized Sir Robert Filmer in his book two treatises on civil government. And the first treatise was an attack on the theory of Sir Robert Filmer, which we will talk when we study modern political philosophy. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Immanuel Kant, and so many other political philosophers have used social contract theory, but in very different way. The classic expressions of social contract theory of political obligation comes from Leviathan of Thomas Hobbes and second treatise of John Locke. Friends, Thomas Hobbes answers the question why we formed a government. From time immemorial, from an ancient period, and he is not sure about the date, but he was saying that at some particular point of history, man formed a government, and he was investigating why we formed a government. And he was saying that because the situation without a government is terrific. Man is not able to trust another man. Death is sure. At any time, you may die. So liberty means the liberty to do all what you like to do. In such a situation, your life has no guarantee. So to escape this terrible situation, Hobbes says all of us surrendered, our forefathers surrendered our liberty, our independence to a common authority. And we entered into a covenant or a contract. Why? We entered into that contract to obey the sovereign. And according to John Locke, another social contract theorist, you are living in a territory is the idea that you are in a tacit agreement to live in that country. So all of you sitting in this classroom are born in this land. That itself means you are in a tacit agreement with the government there. It doesn't matter whether you agreed to a contract with the pen and white paper. It doesn't matter. But the idea is that there is a tacit agreement between you and your government, because the very idea of you are born in this land gives the fact that you are in a contract. That is why, friends, you purchased land in this part of the world. You enter into a contract with other people. You marry other people. You have a social relationship with other people. And you earn a living in this land. This means you are in a tacit contract with the land you are born. So you have a moral obligation to obey the laws of the land you are born. So sovereign will have the authority to make, enforce and interpret laws which you are supposed to oblige. Clear? So Hobbes said that, Thomas Hobbes said that subject means people. Subject consent to obey those who have effective power over the subject. We all obey those who have power over us. And Locke too derived the idea of obligation from the idea of consent. And Locke says consent is the proper source of obligation. Where does obligation come from? It comes from consent. We give consent to the ruler. That is why ruler is where he is now, because we have given him the consent. And why should we give consent? And why should the ruler get the consent? Without the consent, ruler cannot be in power. Why? Because all of us are born free. You don't owe anything to anybody. You are all born free. All of you who are sitting in this classroom are born free. You owe nothing to anybody, nor to your parents, nor to any force. So you don't need to obey anybody. In fact, you don't need to obey anybody without giving consent. If you have given consent to a sovereign that I will obey you, you are obliged to obey the laws of the sovereign. So we have already given a consent to obey the law of your land. That's why you are supposed to obey. Otherwise, you are not in any way bound to obey the law because you are born free. That is what John Locke talks about the consent theory of obligation. But friends, David Hume, he was something like a utilitarian who had certain disagreement with the tacit consent theory of John Locke, who wrote a book in 1752, titled Of the Original Contract. And he objected what Locke said about consent. Tacit consent is the idea that you are born in a land. That idea itself gives you an obligation to obey the law of that land. That is what Locke says. And Hume says it is wrong. For example, the most people who are born in a land has given their consent to obey the law because of the fact that you are born, so you should give consent to obey the law is a wrong idea according to David Hume. Because you imagine a situation that you are taken to a ship where the captain of the ship is intoxicated and he is a drunkard, a regular drunkard. But you entered into the contract with the ship management that you will pay fee for entering the ship and they will take to a destination where you wanted to go. But the problem is that the captain of the ship is a drunkard. And David Hume says, it is unfair to pay the fee. Why? Because the captain of the ship is drunkard. What is the security that ship management will give you for paying the fee? By paying the fee, two things should be certain. One is that you should reach the destination. Second is that you should get the security of life. What if that drunkard captain who fell asleep while taking the ship, driving the ship, steering the ship? What is security to your life? So paying fee is like obeying law. So management is responsible for your safe journey, but captain is drunkard. So for Hume, it seems the obligation to obey the law derives not from consent, that you agreed the ship management that you will pay the fee for entering the ship. So it is not like that the obligation to obey the law derives not from the consent or the contract, but an obligation. Your obligation comes from the utility of the system of laws. What is the utility? You should get the utility that you will reach the destination if you pay the fee. That the ship management should ensure. If so, you think it with the law of obedience to law, what Hume said, you consider that analogy with the obedience to law. Why should we obey the law? We should obey the law because we have certain interest. And what is our interest? We expect certain utility from all our actions. So when you obey law, you should get certain utility. If that utility is not deriving from your obedience to law, you are not supposed to obey that law. Clear? That's why if there is no utility in obeying law, you are not supposed to obey law. That is what David Hume discussed about the Locke's theory of consent. And friends, based on this, the utilitarians proposed an attack on political obligation of the social contract theorist. Let us see what the utilitarians talk about the idea. Why should we obey the law of our land? Why should we obey the law of our land? Utilitarians tell you that, and utilitarians are primarily Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, which we will discuss when you study modern Western political philosophy next year. Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill and so many other people like David Hume are utilitarians. But these people had nothing to say about political obligation. They never believe in the idea of political obligation. Utilitarians have trouble with the idea of obligation of any kind. Why? They are saying that your guiding principle is always the guiding principle which motivate your action and behavior is the idea of utility. The idea of utility. So you want to promote the greatest happiness of the greatest number in your society, that all action should promote greatest happiness of the greatest number. And obligation here seems to be nothing and no binding. Obligation is not binding. Why? Because your obligation is possible only if your action derives a utility. For example, you think this way. I can give you an analogy. If you can gain money, more good, if you can gain more good, more utility by giving the money in your possession to a charity than paying your debts, what you should do, friends? In case you think that it is better to give your money in possession to a charity than paying your debts, what do you prefer to do, friends? Utilitarians tell you that obviously you should then give money to charity, not to your creditors. Right? You will never pay your debt in case if you feel that paying or giving your money to charity is far better, because it gives you more good or more utility. So you avoid the obligation to your creditors. So use the same analogy with obedience to law. You use the analogy of utilitarians to law and obedience. You should obey or disobey the law of your land based on the utility derived from that particular activity. So, more than being a mere moral question of why should I obey law, the most important thing to obedience to law is the utility factor. If your reason suggests that, if your logic of the mind suggests that disobeying law brings you more good, then you should disobey the law. What a philosophy. You should disobey law if it gives you more happiness. Then you disobey law. This is what the utilitarians tell you about obedience. So they never believe in the paramount importance of obedience to law. It's a stupid idea for them. And let us see what the idealist will have to talk about obligation. Idealist, 19th century political philosophers, and they have proposed unconditional and unlimited obligation to law. Primarily, idealists are, Immanuel Kant, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, T.H. Green. These are people associated with idealism. And the idealist supported unconditional and unlimited obligation. There is no question of disobeying or resisting political authority. Once you are born to a political authority, you should obey the law of the land till you die. G.W. Hegel or George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, he was one of the famous exponent of the idealist theory of state, which inspired even fascism in Germany and Italy. Hitler was inspired by this idea of George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And Hegel glorified the idea of state. And he said, look, the way in which he expresses the idea of state. He said, state is the incarnation of God. State is a divine reason. State is the march of God on earth. It is the most legitimate thing for Hegel. The most reasonable thing in human world is state. So he argued, when you obey the law of your state, you're essentially following a divine command. So once you obey the law, you will get freedom by obeying law of your state. So you have unlimited political obligation. But friends, this idea later resulted in the birth of fascist political ideologies in Europe that Hegel was responsible for proposing or for the emergence of fascist political regime. And Hegel was, in a sense, looking at Rousseau. Rousseau was, in a sense, responsible for the rise of fascism in the world. And T.H. Green, he was also another person with the idealist tradition. He declared that government cannot claim an unconditional obedience to citizen. But he was opposite to what Hegel said. He was saying something opposite to what Hegel said. What is it? Let us see, friends. Green argued, T.H. Green argued that all of you owe your allegiances to society. You owe allegiance to society, not to the state or to the government. So the organizer of power in society is not state. The idea is very clear. He is very categorical about obligation. He was saying that the organizer of power or organizer of political authority in your society is not society, is not state, but what is it? It is the community called society. And your society should be recognized as political authority. Clear? So Green's concept of political obligation is based on his principle of common good. What is it? You are saying that obligation, why I obey law of my land is based on my own perception about common good of my society. You have your own perception about what should happen in the society, how law should provide, how peace should provide, how other people should prosper in their life, how people should interact with each other. I have my own sense of how society should function. So I have a perception of common good. And why I obey the law of my land? Because I obey the law of my land because I have a perception of a common good, and the law of my land should promote the common good perception which I have. Is going something metaphysical about what does it mean to say a political obligation, friends. You see, in his lectures on the principles of political obligation, which he delivered in the Oxford University, that was a one-year speech, which later published as a book. It was titled Lectures on the Principles of Political Obligation, which was published in 1882. He argued that state itself is obliged to promote common good. You see, why I obey the law of my land? I obey the law of my land because the law of my land will promote the common good which I have about the land where I live. So if the law of my land promote the common good perception I have about my society, of course I am bound to obey the law of my land. If the law will promote peace in the society, if the law promote what we call prosperity of my fellow citizen, if law brings peace and security in my land, of course I am bound to obey the law of my land because the law confirms my own perception about common good of my society. So friends, he was saying a metaphysical theory of why should I obey the law of my land. He was saying your freedom comes from your moral nature. Your freedom comes from your moral nature. All of you, the members of the community, should have equal opportunity for self-development. I have an opportunity for my own prosperity, and all of you sitting in this classroom will have your equal opportunity for your own prosperity, right? And equal opportunity for self-development is a condition of freedom. See, how can I become a happy person when my fellow people are unhappy? Or how can I become unhappy in a situation all of my fellow beings are happy? That should not happen in a society. If I am happy, you should also be happy. If I am unhappy, you should also be unhappy. That is a good society. So it is the duty of your state. It is the duty of your state to create equal opportunity for self-development. Yeah. I should have prosperity and you have prosperity, and all of us get equal opportunity for what may be called self-development. And self-development, friends, it is a condition conducive to human freedom. Okay, it's a condition conducive to human freedom. You see, he was pointing out that that law can force the individual to perform certain acts. Law can, of course, the law of your land can control your behavior. He has no objection. But how the law can control you? The law can control your behavior externally only. That is, in your interaction with other people, law can control your behavior in order to prevent you from harming other people. Okay. So if your behavior harm other people, state can prevent your action by law. That is good. But what if state is coming to teach you morality? No, it's wrong. Your morality is your own morality. That comes from your intelligence. You have an intelligence. You are a rational creature. You have a mind, a thinking mind, and your moral consciousness comes from your own thinking process. And state or education institution should never teach you what is morality, what is right thing, what is wrong thing. It is you. You are the master of your own moral percepts. That is, individual is a moral agent. Look how beautifully he was trying to narrate a metaphysical theory of political obligation. Why should I obey law? Because I am a moral agent. I have my own worldview. And if the law of my land promotes my worldview, which conforms with the similar worldview of other fellow beings, of course, I and you are bound to obey the law of my land. Clear? So your will is your morality. Your morality is the basis of freedom. That's why he is associated with a famous principle. He proposed this famous maxim in political philosophy classes. What is that? Will, not force, is the basis of state. Will, not force, is the basis of state. The complex idea, metaphysical idea associated with this principle, we will talk when you come to Western political philosophy classes next year, friends. I'm going to another perspective, Marxist perspective about why should I obey the law of my land? What Marxist talks about. Let us come to that discussion, friends. So far we have discussed the divine command theory, the social contract theory, the utilitarian theory, the idealist theory. Now we are going to talk about what Marxist people have to tell you about why should I obey or why should I have a political obligation. Friends, Marxists view that state is not the organized power of the community. Friends, there are 30 people sitting in this class. And Marxists will tell you that state is not the state of the 30 people sitting in this class. State is not the organized power of all the people sitting in this class. Why? Because state is the organized power of a dominant class. Some people in this class is more powerful than other people. And state belongs to that people who are able to dominate over other people sitting in this class. Just like that, Marxists will have a spectacular interpretation of power in society. And they are saying that, those who are dominant in the society will have state as theirs. If that is the case, why, friends, why should you obey law? No, you are not supposed to obey the law of your land. Why? Because state is not your state. State is just a false consciousness. State belongs to that class which owns means of production. Beautifully presenting ideas. Look, the purpose of state is not the welfare of all, just like what T.H. Green says, equal opportunity for self-development of all the people. It's not. It's a wrong idea. This is just false consciousness. These kinds of things will not work in human world. That is what Marxist people will tell you, friends. And you see, friends, they are saying the state belongs to the class that owns means of production, as I told you a short while ago. Its purpose is not general welfare. State helps always the strong competitors. That so many people are stronger in this class, some other people are weaker in this class, and state always promote the interest of the stronger party. Why? To increase your wealth and your power. It helps the stronger by exploiting the weaker. There are weaker party in this class, and state always helps the stronger party to prevail over the weaker party. So society is class divided. See, Your society where you live, we all feel that we have all equality, liberty, freedom, so on, so many things, and we have opportunities. These are all false notions which you will get right from the time you are born, right from the schooling you will get, right from the education system you have. You will get it from community that you have equality and so many blah 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 things. But there is nothing. These are all false consciousness implanted in your mind, thinking mind, and you will never escape from that skewed thought system. Because society is class divided, individuals no more require any obligation towards the state. That is what Marxist said. Look, friends, why? Wealth is increasing in the society. Why wealth is increasing in the society? Friends, you just think, you just imagine why wealth is in your society is increasing every day. But it is increasing disproportionately. It is not increasing proportionately. It is increasing disproportionately. Why? Because state helps the weak, the stronger party to prevail over the weaker party. Because social arrangements are created unequally. Distribution, natural resources are distributed unequally. If so, why should I obey the law of my land? Why should I obey the authority of my land? No way. You are obliged to the authority. Marxist will tell you. Friends, you are no more obliged to obey the law. What if you obey the feudal landlord? What if you obey the moneyed classes? What if you obey people who have command over you? What if you obey your teacher always without questioning him? What if you obey your parents without questioning the morality of their decisions? What if you obey people simply because they are your seniors? So that gives them privileges. What if you simply obey your seniors? You come to Brennan College, for example, and 1 year before, some other people have come to Brennan College, and they are taking it as an advantage over you, and they are simply coming to rag you on the fact that they came to Brennan College 1 year before you. Friends, that gives them a privilege. No, it should not be the basis of constructing or engineering society. There should not be any privilege just because of the fact that somebody is born earlier than you. So Marxists believe obedience is a bourgeois idea. It's a false notion or a false consciousness. Individuals can have any obligation provided you live in a classless, stateless society. Till such a society is being created, friends, we can only think of obliging your class interest, right? You are student, so you have student interest. Just like that, you can imagine only about your class solidarity, not solidarity to any other thing. Because you need solidarity to rise against power in society. So you have an obligation only towards your class position. Right, this is what Marxist talks about, the political obligation, friends. And let us see what anarchists think about. Why should you obey authority? Anarchist friends will have some intriguing responses to political. First, anarchist advocates, you abolish all organized society. They will tell you that you abolish all organized society. State is an oppressive mechanism. Anarchist will tell you that state is an oppressive mechanism. It curtails your freedom right from the time you are born until you are taken to the coffin. It prevails in you. It is a reality. It comes wherever you go. See, this kind of system is a sham. You should avoid it. You should abolish it. This is not the way society should be organized. Anarchists tell you that state is oppressive. It curtails your liberty. So friends, you live in a community where there is no power centers. How beautiful it is. See, all the people are equal in a society where there is no power, and all people have equal power in the society. Just imagine such a beautiful society where there is no power center, and all the people, if in case if there is power, see, all of us enjoy power equally. That's a good idea, right? Power lies with each one of us. All human beings shall freely and spontaneously adjust with each other. Because humans got that rational mind. You are all rational creatures, and your passions are being governed by your intelligence. Your passions are being governed by your intelligence. Yes, you are not passionately behaving in society because your passions are controlled by your intelligence. Then why should we think about being governed by a state? No, we do not require any external force to regulate our behavior or our action. So anarchists tell you about negative political obligation. Anarchists tell you about negative political obligation. That anarchists like, for example, P.J. Proudhon, Peter Kropotkin, P.J. Proudhon or Peter Kropotkin. They are some of the anarchists, and Gandhi was later an anarchist. Sorry, what did I tell you, friends? Friends, what I said?
Gandhi made an anarchist.
Later, Gandhi became an anarchist.
Before that, we do not require.
Names of anarchists.
Okay, Peter. Okay, friends. There are so many anarchists, but I am referring to two important anarchists: P.J. Proudhon and Peter Kropotkin. P.J. Proudhon and Peter Kropotkin. They argued that, friends, all governmental authority is illegitimate. See, they are arguing that, oh, you have a government. Of course, okay, no problem. But that government is illegitimate because we don't need any government. We don't need any government. Why? Because government is an illegitimate institution. State is suited only to a corrupt society. State is suited only to an immoral society. It's an immoral society. If you have a state, that means that is an immoral society. So individual is obliged only to uphold justice to all people. If you're obliged to provide justice to all the people, of course, why should we think about having a state? No, we don't need a state because we ourselves, we have our own reason. Using that reason, we can provide justice to all the people. So he is obliged, man is obliged only to resist state. You should disobey law. You should abolish state. That is your obligation. Right? What a beautiful argument. Okay, and let us, friends, come to Gandhi and let us wind up this lecture. Gandhi is like an anarchist, or he also talks about negative political obligation. That is his famous idea of civil disobedience. You may know that he proposed a civil obedience, an idea of civil obedience. Civil disobedience implies that you are deliberately disobeying an unjust law. You have all the right to disobey an unjust law, and breaking an unjust law is your duty. What is your obligation? Your obligation to society or state is that you should disobey an unjust law. So the duty of civil disobedience, is to an unjust law is the counterpart of the duty of civil disobedience to a just law. Just like you have a duty to respect a just law, so you have a duty to disrespect an unjust law. You have a duty to disrespect an unjust law. In the same way, you respect a just law. So it is your duty to disrespect unjust laws. You challenge the law. So civil disobedience may be resorted, or started as a protest against an unjust policy of government, or in order to draw the public attention of the government to a demand for political reform. So why you disobey law? You wanted the attention of government to bring in certain reform in the society. That's why you are going for disobedience, to draw the attention of the government, or you are protesting against an unjust policy of government, right? So friends, having said this, let us conclude this lecture by thinking that political obligation is a complex issue, friends. It's a very complex issue, because when you think about disobedience, you have to think twice. You should not simply say that I will disobey the law of my land, because the consequence is bigger. We can't imagine what will be the consequence. So you have to think twice before you go for any kind of disobedience to law of your land. It is necessary. You should realize that we all oblige something to the society or the land we are born. We oblige something to the place we are born, to the land we are born, to the society we are born. So that's why Rousseau said, we have political obligation to general will. We have political obligation to general will. Or Hegel said, we have a political obligation to the divine image of the state. We have political obligation to the divine image of the state. Or T.H. Green suggests that we have political obligation to that common good. We have political obligation to that common good. So it's important to remember that government is only an external agency. You have morality. So you have morality, and your morality is not given by the state. That's an external agency, and a good government is always a product of human creativity. Why that government is there? Because we have a creative mind, and our creative mind created that government. So you have a reasoning ability. So it is essential, friends. Sometimes we need to resist the law. We should resist the law, and it's, of course, you should not simply what we say, think about resisting. You should not simply think about resisting laws, or you should not simply think about obeying laws. Be it obeying laws or disobeying laws, you should think very carefully before doing anything. So if you go for outright disobedience, friends, your society will be destroyed. The society will be destroyed. So spontaneous mass uprisings against the law of your land will not serve any good to your society. Our society will perish. So think very carefully when you are going for any kind of civil disobedience or resistance to the political authority. Friends, that is all about this lecture. This lecture is ended, and the floor is open for discussion.
Sir.
Yes, friends. Yes.